and welcome back to our practice about variables and hypotheses. For this video, we are going to be identifying the experimental variables and formulating a hypothesis. Before we begin, there are some things that I want you to write down at the bottom of this page or maybe on a side paper of your notes or just a way to remember some of these things that you can check up on. So at the bottom of this page, I'm just going to write down a few helpful hints and tips and tricks for us during this video. So remember when we were writing those questions, there was a specific formula that we write. We always start with how does. I personally like to underline it. Next comes our independent variable. Then we have that connecting word, effect. And lastly, at the end is our dependent variable. Another thing we're going to need to remember is what the three variables are, like what they mean, so how we can identify them in a situation, because these are going to be little situations or experiments that you're going to have to think about and figure out what each variable is. So we need to remember that our independent variable is what's being changed. And it is changed by the experimenter, the scientist, the person doing the experiment. Our dependent variables is what's being measured or collected, or the data. And then just to remember, what is a control again? Controls remains the same or is constant. So these are the things you're going to need to remember in order to do this activity. We will go through the first one kind of together. I know we are not in person, but I'll do the best that we can. So going back, the directions say for each of the following scenarios, we are going to need to write a question, determine the independent and dependent variables and a control variable, and write a possible hypothesis. So in number one, in this experiment, two groups of students were given the same math problem. One group was given calculators to complete the problems, and the other group solved the problems without calculators. The completion time was recorded for each group. So there are some key words in this scenario. So if we have to identify variables, remember the independent variable is what's being changed. So in this situation, what is being changed or what is different? Think about the two groups. What is different between the two groups? Hopefully you said the use of calculators. So that is our independent variable. What was different or changed? Next, we want to identify our dependent variable. So that is something that's measured, collected, recorded. So what was recorded or collected in this group? A completion time was recorded. Here we're being asked for one control variable. And remember, control variables are constant, unchanging, stays the same. So in this exact problem, they said something stays the same. I'm going to wait for you guys to look for that word same. It's right here. The same math problems were given. Now, what I like to do next is I like to write the question because we wrote it down at the bottom in our helpful hints. So remember, our questions start with how does, then we write our independent variable, which we figured out, affect, and then our dependent variable. So remember, again, questions start with how does, And then for both questions and hypotheses, we always write the independent variable first. So how does the use of calculators and then we need our connecting word, that connecting word affect. And what does it affect? It affects the time to complete math problems. A hypothesis. We write our hypotheses starting with if the. And then just like questions, our independent variable is written first. So we have if the, and then go back and look. What is our independent variable? A use of calculators. Next, we usually pick increases or decreases, which is kind of a weird way to say the use of calculators was like allowed. We're just going to say increases, so we gave them calculators. So if the use of calculators increases or like was allowed to happen, then what happens? Then we use our dependent variable. It always goes independent and then dependent. So if the use of calculators increases, then the time to complete the math problems will probably decrease. If I have a calculator, I can do math way faster. For the next three of them, I'm going to give you guys some hints. I'm going to underline some things for you. So for number 2, it says students of different ages were given the same puzzle to assemble. The time it took to assemble the puzzle was measured. So if you get stuck, I would underline some of those key terms. For number 3, it says a study was completed using 3 different sized magnets. The number of paper clips each sized magnet picked up was recorded. And then in the last one, it says a study was attempted in order to determine if the length of string for a string telephone affected the telephone's sound clarity. So for this one, I want you to think, what was changing? So they were determining if something was happening, then something else would happen. So this one's kind of already written in a specific way. So I want you to think about what variables we write first and what variables we write second.